Hey, I am Liam, and I am here with Kabir, Gahao, and Sarth, and we will be discussing the effects of wetland drainage on phosphorus loading. What is the problem? Wetland drainage has been a problem since the last quarter of the 19th century, near the time of European settlement. It became a larger practice alongside more efficient technologies and society's demand for food. States have exceeded 50% of destruction of these wetlands. Some states, like Minnesota, exceed 75%. The reasons are clear for wetland drainage, and the impacts of the drainage are starting to take shape. The prairie pothole region takes up a good amount of the central of North America, including both Canada and the United States. The prairie pothole region was created by the Wisconsin glaciation event around 25,000 years ago and ended about 11,000 years ago. The potholes were left over after the glacier scraped through the top layer, leaving little depressions all over the landscape. The exact problem site that we will be looking at is the St. Denis Wildlife Area. It has significant importance when it comes to scientific research due to its longevity as a scientific research station. Phosphorus. Phosphorus is an essential nutrient in the ecosystem. It is usually the limiting nutrient in most wetlands, but it can be abundant in wetlands where productivity is high. Phosphorus is important in many biologic processes, from its uses in the energy as ATP and the use in photosynthetic organisms. Phosphorus loading in a system can create highly eutrophic water bodies. Here is a little slide showing a fraction of the movement of phosphorus in a very crude way. Phosphorus can be transported through many of the mediums through different processes and uptakes. You may have phosphorus that can be dominated by either hydrological processes or biogeochemical processes. The movement of phosphorus can always be changed if the environment is changed by either spatiotemporal changes or anthropogenic changes. Some impacts regarding hydrological and ecological problems. Flooding downstream can be increased through wetland drainage. You can lose groundwater recharge, negative implications in respect to nutrient cycling, and loss of essential carbon sinks, and the loss of habitat and wildlife areas for numerous species. As an example, waterfowl, where around 70% of the total duck production of species can be reliant on pothole wetlands. And when it comes to social and economic impacts, damages caused to communities downstream of consolidated drainage wetlands need to pay for either levies, which are preventative costs, or damage from floods, post-event costs. Recreational and aesthetically valuable land may be drained away. Potential loss of profit from tourism, aka hunting or photography. Increased costs of maintenance of agriculture and potential damage, erosion and flooding. Property value of land could be in jeopardy with increased chance of flooding, destruction of land, and loss of agricultural and fishery products. The stakeholders. The stakeholders of the current wetland drainage problem can be broken down into two main parties, government and non-government. The government aspect can be the policymakers who determine how best to manage wetlands through input from citizens and scientists. Governments on all levels are the figureheads who will put in place the policy and regulations. On the non-government side, there are farmers and society and other interest groups. They all have varying opinions on the management of wetlands. Some stakeholders, such as farmers, may have more direct consequences from said management. The problem is, with the decrease of wetlands through drainage, what are the possible implications on downstream flooding and possible eutrophication in remaining wetlands? The Canadian Land Service scheme and Prairie Pond model have been performed and then discussed in terms of their capability of transporting phosphorus through the wetland catchment pond.
Hydrological processes. Hydrological processes are critical in understanding the movement of water and nutrient into and out of water bodies. In this project, class model was used to predict hydrological output such as surface fluxes, snow accumulation, and soil moisture. The soil moisture figure below indicates solid ice at lower temperature and a mixture of soil water at higher temperature. P model uses class output to predict runoff, infiltration, evaporation, driven by steady set climate observation. It predicts more evaporation from wetland than upland. It also predicts more runoff from snowmelt as temperature warms up. The model also predicts no soil drainage, indicating all the water that infiltrates into the upland is lost to transpiration. Two hydrological processes were compared against each other. Both runoff and snowmelt peak in the spring season. There is an expected relationship between these two variables because snowmelt is the main contributor of runoff in the prairie pothole region. This is just a video showing snowmelt and runoff relationship. You can see as temperature increases, snowmelt increases, causing runoff and nutrient movement. P in pond versus runoff. Input of phosphorus and its concentration in a prairie pothole region are reliant on runoff. This suggests as runoff in the catchment area increases, there will be an increase in phosphorus concentration from erosion. A linear regression plot indicates a positive relationship between phosphorus concentration and runoff. Runoff versus mass of phosphorus. From the figure, the mass of phosphorus fluctuation in pond is similar to that of the concentration of phosphorus in pond. Peak in mass of phosphorus are observed simultaneously with runoff peaks. The linear regression plot shows a positive relationship between the mass of phosphorus in pond and runoff in catchment. Runoff versus mass of sediment. The plot shows runoff increase with increase in sediment. Again, a positive linear relationship was observed between these two variables. Runoff versus P-spill. P-spill is the discharge of water including phosphorus concentration. The peaks of P-spill and runoff are extremely similar, suggesting increase in volume in a catchment area from runoff will result in a discharge of phosphorus from the initial pond to downstream. As mentioned before, prairie pothole regions are known to be dependent on snow over rainfall for runoff. Snowmelt is observed prior to the majority of phosphorus concentration in the pond. Again, a positive relationship was observed between phosphorus concentration in pond and snowmelt. Mass of phosphorus versus snowmelt. There are matching peaks of phosphorus in the pond as snowmelt in the spring season. The continuous snowmelt throughout the spring increased phosphorus transportation into the system. Again, a linear regression plot proves a positive relationship between mass of phosphorus in the pond and snowmelt. Snowmelt versus mass of sediment. Mass of sediment increase with increase in snowmelt. This shows a positive relationship between the snowmelt and mass of sediments in pond. P-spill versus snowmelt. Snowmelt is the main contributor to the volume of the isolated prairie ponds. During the spring season, there is an expected increase in pond volumes. With that, an increase of P-spill downstream. Snowmelt happens prior to P-spill. It is important to note that all the hydrological outputs were plotted against P export, but only snowmelt and runoff displayed positive relationship with phosphorus export. This indicates runoff and snowmelt as the dominant hydrological process.
Okay, let's move to the assessment of the biogeochemical processes. This is the content. Biogeochemical cycle is a process that nutrients movement through biosphere, lithosphere, atmosphere, and hydrosphere on the Earth. In Sundanese area, phosphorus is mainly exported through wetland drainage in the form of inorganic phosphate. Although hydrological processes are dominant in phosphor export, it is important to understand the biogeochemical processes. So what are the dominant biogeochemical controls on phosphor export? Let's see. Hydrological cycle refers to the movement of water between the different subsystems of the Earth. It plays a big role in sedimentation and nutrient movement. Oxygen conditions. In aerobic conditions, Fe2 plus are oxidized to Fe3 plus and bound to phosphor to form sediment. The formation of MnO2 is also increased. It can accelerate phosphor sedimentation. Both processes decrease phosphor export. However, decomposition of phosphor also increased. This process releases more phosphate into water and phosphor export increased. In anaerobic conditions, sediments dissolved. Phosphor export increased, but decomposition of phosphor decreased. Phosphor export decreased. Generally,
Aerobic conditions decrease phosphor export, while anaerobic conditions increase phosphor export. pH conditions. When pH is low, the environment is acidic. It tends to form ferric oxide hydroxide and alum phosphor sediments. Enhanced photosynthesis absorb more phosphorus and decrease phosphorus export. When pH is high, the bonding capacity of two forms of sediments decrease. Photosynthesis decreases, so phosphor export increase. Nitrogen can influence phosphor export by following steps. First, animals convert organic nitrogen to ammonia through ammonification. Ammonium can take a hydroxyl group from water molecule and leave hydrogen ion since it's a weak acid. So pH decreases, phosphor export decreases. Carbon. Carbon dioxide can decrease pH by forming H2CO3, which is also a weak acid. Fish, microbes, and bacteria can release CO2 through inspiration. That decreases phosphor export. The decay and decomposition of dead plants and fish will release phosphor. That increases phosphor export. Sulfur. Bacteria can generate hydrogen sulfide, H2S, especially in anaerobic conditions. It is a weak acid. As mentioned earlier, it can decrease phosphor export. Over 0.002 ppm of H2S can kill fish because its high toxicity. Phosphor released from the dead fish will increase phosphor export. Wind. Lakes and wetlands are relatively stable in summer and winter, but in spring and fall, wind causes resuspension of sediments. This process rejects more concentrated phosphor water to the surface, increases the phosphor export. Temperature. High temperature increases the activity of microorganisms and further decreases the retention time of CaCO3 phosphor and magnesium phosphor in sediments. High temperature also reduces the solubility of oxygen, increases respiration and ammonification. This all increases phosphor export. Water hardness. Water hardness refers to the amount of calcium and magnesium dissolved in water. Hard water contains more phosphor sediments than soft water. That indirectly reduces the phosphor export through wetland drainage.
For doing our sensitivity analysis, we use the Prairie Wetland Groundwater Phosphorus model. To run this model, we need certain hydrological inputs which we obtain from yet another model, the class model. The phosphorus model assumes the pond and the catchment geometry to be perfectly cylindrical for the ease of calculations. The pond is considered to be located in the center and has a smaller radius. RP is the pond radius and RW is the catchment radius. The water depth in the pond is governed by the spill threshold, which is ZR here. The higher the ZR, the lower the spillage or drainage. We did a sensitivity analysis of catchment area to pond area ratio. We assigned the two radii to be the parameters and P pond and P spill as the output function, which is the concentration of phosphorus in pond and concentration of phosphorus spilling out respectively. The two parameters are thus RW and RP. We did the analysis for two scenarios, that is with drainage and without drainage. So for with drainage condition, we changed the value of ZR to 1.1 meter, and for without drainage, we kept it as high as 100 meters so that there is practically no spillage out of the pond. So these are the results for no drainage conditions. There is no phosphorus spillage or no phosphorus outflow because there is no drainage taking place. Now this is the maximum, minimum and mean values of concentration of phosphorus in pond against time. This is a contour of cumulative phosphorus spill against the two different radii, that is the pond radius and the catchment radius. But since there is no phosphorus spillage, we don't see any contour. Now these are the results for drainage conditions. As you can see, there is maximum value of cumulative phosphorus spillage at largest catchment radius and smallest pond radius, which makes sense because larger catchment area contributes more runoff and smaller pond volume decreases its capacity to hold water. This is the time series of cumulative phosphorus spill for all the combinations of pond and catchment radius, the lowest representing the smallest catchment area and largest pond area, whereas the highest representing the largest catchment area and smallest pond area. These are the maximum, minimum, and mean values of phosphorus spillage against time. And these are the maximum, minimum, and mean values of phosphorus concentration in pond. Now, as we look at this peak, at the peaks in 2013 and 2015, they are slightly higher in drainage condition than in no drainage condition. In drainage condition, it is greater than 7 for 2013, but less than 7 in no drainage condition. The reason is because in no drainage condition there is more water available, which causes the dilution of the phosphorus concentration, while in drainage condition the water gets spilled out and the concentration of phosphorus increases.
So in conclusion, we can draw the main hydrological processes include runoff and snowmelt in the transportation of phosphorus in the system. And for biogeochemical, oxygen conditions, pH, wind, temperature, and water hardness control the majority of the phosphorus movement around the system. A few limitations of the model: prairie pond models do not take into account the groundwater recharge as we set the BPF to 0. It is known phosphorus transports the groundwater, so we would have to look further into that. Another thing is the figure. It assumes the geometry of the catchment and the pond is cylindrical, which is not truly the case. And for future research, more research on other nutrients that may potentially be altered physically and chemically by wetland drainage, as well as more research on phosphorus movement through the groundwater. A little end statement: we need to continue the research on wetland drainage impacts. As we push forward toward the brink of the tipping point, better management strategies need to be put into place. And for references, you can find them on our website at www.ipcc.ca.